is my great pleasure to introduce Ivor MacFarlane.
Thank you. Is old.
There we go. Ivor MacFarlane is old. That means he knows stuff, and he's learned some life hacks, and he's decided to give us some ITSM related life hacks. So the pearls of wisdoms of 30 years, whatever figure we want to put behind it.
I wish it was only 30.
Only 30 years of experience. So Ivor, over to you. Thank you very much.
I remember when I got the Lifetime Achievement Award a few years back, and they were doing the description first for the name. And they said he's been doing service management since 1976. And there was this consensus from the room. But unfortunately, it's true. Right. I wrote this in Keynote. I don't know if you get rid of the got it.
Get rid of the got it, yeah.
Maybe is it a touch screen?
Where's the
Is it
BCS guy?
No, it's not as simple as that.
I don't know if that's actually there because I've already clicked on it.
Yeah, so it's
Can you see this meeting is being recorded on the screen?
No, it's fine. It looks good.
so we just asked here.
This is nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. Okay. So I wrote this in Keynote, so I'm now faced with PowerPoint. So if I don't know what I'm doing, that's my first excuse. Okay. So what we're going to talk about.
Did you want that?
Oh, well, yeah. Works. So clearly I'm going to be totally self-indulgent and wish we're on about 35 years doing ITIL and even longer doing service management and things that I've got wrong along the way, watched other people get along the way, that all of stuff. And you know, it's going to be that kind of opinionated BS that old people give you all the time. Got that? Hopefully it's going to be all of those things, none of those things, with the emphasis on none of them. So I want to talk about something sensible, and of course that doesn't work. What I actually want to talk about is that all the things I've seen over the last, fill in a large number of years, they've been sold as this is a really clever new thing, this is a complicated thing that you need to understand in order to do the job. And what I've actually seen over the last 30 to 40 years is that that's not true. And that just about everything we do is screamingly simple and obvious, and we already know most of the underpinning ideas. And the more I've seen about that, the more I want to stand up and talk about it. So, also I've learned that if you're trying to deal with a complicated context and concept in a complicated environment, was that simple? Wow. Then start thinking about a simplified version we go through. So that's what I want to talk about. We'll make the caveat that what I've seen is that service management is getting better at doing what's needed. Sometimes it's easy to get cynical about what we do and how we're not getting messages across to people and we're not supporting them. But if you can roll your mind back to previous generations and previous situations, things are actually getting better. One of my heroes in this business is a guy called Rob England. If you haven't come across it, stuff is absolutely worth following. And he's got even better in the last few years because instead of being Rob England, he's now he's half of Rob England and Sherry Vu, who's now married. And she's at least as clever as Rob. And one of the things that Rob keeps emphasising is it's really easy to get nostalgia about the good old days. But honestly, they were horrible. And things are getting better and we should appreciate that. Right, so a quick caveat. You hear a lot of things about ideas like DevOps and IT service management and Agile and all the rest of it. That's taken from the Manly Ferry. That's my picture. I'm pleased with that. And it would illustrate what I would talk about. When I'm talking about DevOps or ITIL or service management or the rest of it, you talk about some of the elements. So if I'm talking about change management, in the middle of a DevOps talk, is because it's part of ITIL, because ITIL and ITSM are part of DevOps, and coding is part of DevOps. And the same way there. The question says, you know, is that bridge in Sydney, or is it in New South Wales, or is it in Australia? And the answer is yes. So I'm going to talk about some elements, and then you might think, well, that's ITIL is talking about, or service management. We're actually talking about all these frameworks because they do actually use each other. And that's something that I think gets missed. And this is a little box I've used about improvement over the last few years. And it seems to me there are two ways to improve something. You can do new stuff, or you can do stuff in new ways. And you've got two variables, which gives you four options. So, what's all these ideas are there all the time, and they're not absolute limits. And the other caveat is that first one, that every time we try and improve something, what we're trying to improve is an imagined future version, because we don't do anything instantly. So it's important that what we're trying to do is to look at the future. We do that in our everyday life, and we'll come on to that. Because we all joined IT to play with the toys and get excited, didn't we? So as soon as you could an option like that in, we all looked at the top right-hand corner. Of course, it's all about shiny new stuff and amazing things, and aren't we incredible? And there is maybe a bit of that, but that's actually a bit rarer than we think. And the rest is useful too. So, across the bottom, not doing new things, but we're doing old things in new ways. And there's a lot in there, and a lot we can talk about in that. That's not what I'm going to talk about on this one, but there's a whole presentation in that area as well. I want to focus on that one. What we're actually doing a lot of the time in our frameworks and our approaches is taking old ideas and applying them to new environments. We're taking ideas that we know about because we've survived 20, 30, 40, 50 years of life, and then actually putting them into a work environment. We don't always realise we're doing that, and sometimes we're told the opposite because people want to sell you the shiny new toy. But actually that's what we're doing, and we realise that, it actually makes it easier to do it because we realise we already know it, which I think is the big message I want to get across. So, first example. All these frameworks, all these concepts are based on common terms and common terminology, and they'll tell you, for example, that ITIL delivers you a common language so that you can discuss things. We know this. This is what we do in everyday life. So here is a nice family picture. You've got three pairs of people. You've got the old codgers on the left, which is where I am nowadays. And you've got the people hopefully earning the money and doing the work on the right, and you've got the young kids in the middle. Those three pairs talk to each other in a detailed, complex language that is indecipherable by the other four. The two on the left are still talking about the Stones and the Beatles and tripping out of Woodstock or whatever it was. And the kids in the middle are all preoccupied with the rules to the latest game or the Squid Game or whatever it is that they're playing at. And the ones on the right are trying to talk about, can we afford to do this and can we afford to do that? And that means that their conversations are in detail and they can communicate with a lot of finesse. But when they come and sit around the table, they don't use those terms. We actually understand that I've got to say something, it's got to be understandable to the kids and to the old guys. So we simplify our language and we condense things. You just do that automatically. Think about, as a kid, when you were talking to your grandparents. One thing you learn quickly, and I'm seeing that at the moment, my 5-year-old and 2-year-old, I'm staying with granddaughters in Wimbledon. And in the couple of days while I've been there, they start saying things on the first day that I have no idea what you're talking about. By the time we got to the end of the week, they've simplified it for a poor old guy like me who doesn't know their jargon. And you will do that. And that's a message that if we learn that in our work environment, then let's understand that we already know that and apply it to work. And if you want the work equivalent for it, you've got the network guys who are talking absolute, geek-laden gobbledygook all the time to each other that makes sense to each other. You've all got that degree of geek-laden gobbledygook, quite like that phrase, that you talk to your colleagues about. But you wouldn't try and get funding for that by using that terminology. Go and talk to the finance department, and you know that if you want to succeed, you've got to talk about it in a different way. So what we're doing is using a skill that we learned growing up to actually be good at work. It's not a genius. The reason this all came to me was I was doing ITIL 4 foundation courses, and we were talking about guiding principles. There they are on the left. And the more I talked about them, the more I realised I knew these, and I knew them because my grandmother taught me them 60 years ago. Yeah, roughly 60 years ago. So I did a one-to-one mapping of guiding principles to my grandmother, and they work. So focus on value. And what you'd get from my grandmother all the time was, what you're trying to do here. You know, who wants that? What is it all for? It's exactly the same principle. Start where you are is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, you're doing something good, hang on to it. You probably wouldn't get away with publishing Don't Throw the Baby Out with the Bathwater in ITIL. It's always been a bit stuck up in that respect. But that's the same thing. I learned it, we know it, come to use it. Progress iteratively with feedback, sounds great. When you're putting sugar in your tea or water in your squash, my grandmother's line was always, now you can always put more in later, but you can't take it out. And I think that's a really good lesson about progressing iteratively. You know, don't do too much until you know you're getting it right. Don't run miles until you're sure you're going in the right direction. It's so obvious we don't realise we already know it, and we get seduced by fancy phrases and ITIL speak and all the rest of it. Two heads are better than one. Collaborate and promote visibility. I'll come on to collaborate in a little more detail, and I'll show you a couple of heads that don't match. To be fair to my grandmother, the whole phrase was, two heads are better than one, even if one of them is a sheep's head. She was a strange woman, my grandmother. When it gets further, I'll show you why that's actually very pertinent. Think and work holistically. You know, how's that going to work then? How are you going to fit all that in? Obvious stuff. And keep it simple and practical. Honestly, she would say to me a lot, you're trying to count the legs in a field and divide by 4 to find out how many horses you've got. And if you do that, you always end up with 13.75 horses. You count the bloody heads. And I'm sure you can think of situations in your work environment where you've had somebody doing something ridiculously complicated when the obvious is screaming at them. You know, count the heads. And the last one, I thought I'd have trouble with, optimize and automate. My grandmother was born in 1890. She was not a computer technician. But she would say to me, you're just going to have to get yourself into the habit of doing something. And that was automating people. And it's a really important skill. We need to understand that automation is not just about technology. And that actually we need to get people into habits of doing things, and that we can sort of pre-program and automate the people to some extent as well. Also gets into the idea of unlearning, which is a whole interesting issue as well. So it's not just the principles. I think that it's much wider than that, and every concept that certainly we do in ITIL and service management and DevOps and the rest, I've put just about in brackets there on the grounds that I'm sure eventually somebody is going to come up with something that doesn't work, but I haven't found anything yet that we do in our IT environment that is actually clever. I think all of it relates to things we already do. And every family, everyone here grew up with a change management practice that maps absolutely onto the ITIL change management practice. Actually, of course, the ITIL change management practice maps on to what we grew up with. So let me show you your family change management process. Standard changes and authority levels first. So, standard change. Your partner is cooking dinner and they've given you a shopping list. So off you trot to the supermarket with the list. And it says on the list, chestnut mushrooms. And they don't have chestnut mushrooms, but you know enough about what they're cooking and what they're like, and enough about cooking to know that I'll get the white ones. It's better than nothing, it'll do the job. Standard change, delegated authority. You don't need to consult anyone else. You're doing the shopping. I can swap this for that and swap that for that. know about standard change. If they haven't got any mushrooms at all, you might need to go up to a higher level of consultation and ring your partner up and say, they haven't got any mushrooms. What shall I do? Do you want me to try and get some frozen mushrooms? Or is there another thing we could do? Or does it not really need the mushrooms at all? You need to consult with somebody, so at a high level of authority. If you're thinking about moving your entire family to California or Australia, then it probably requires a family meeting. This is the equivalent of the board level consultation. And making sure everybody who's going to be affected of it gets a chance to have their say. We all grew up in this kind of environment. I remember being sat down and talked. We're thinking of moving. When I was 11 years old, and there was a big consultation, and my sister said, well, I'm not going to move, but that's okay, you're 18, you can move away. And I said, yeah, I don't mind going. And my mother was reluctant, and then there was a bit of easing later, and I remember what finally clinched it was my father took her out, poured rum and coke down her neck all night, and got sufficiently drunk for her to say, yeah, I'll go anywhere, I don't care. And he applied for 8 jobs the next morning. And we ended up in Scotland. I'm sure you can see that kind of process, with or without the alcohol, applying in your work environment a lot. Yeah. You work on persuading those guys, for the next week, just work on them, and we'll bring them round. So we know this, we're using our everyday skills to do it. And we get on to consultation, advisory and change process, and testing things. You all know you all do testing at home. Anyone know what they are? Test pots. Paint a little bit of the colours behind where the wardrobe is going to go, and we can see whether it looks right on the wall. We do testing at home. And if you've ever not done that and just painted the whole room in a colour that you then decided you didn't like, I guarantee the next time you repaint a room, you'll go for the test pot option. We know this. And if you've ever had an absolute disaster because you didn't do testing properly, actually, experience shows you probably don't do testing properly the next time either, but just an IT feature.
Lessons learned?
Yeah, or not. It is not compulsory to learn a lesson. So incident and problem management, just the same. We do those at home. So you're cooking tuna pasta bake, gooey tuna-y stuff, and you put it in the oven with pasta, and you put cheese on top. Always cook it the same way, always cook it in the same dish. You're cooking for your family, and you go to get the dish out, it's not there. So do we stop everything? Nobody in this house eats until I've found my dish. Or do we invoke incident management? You get another dish, and you maybe make it a bit smaller and deeper with thicker cheese on the top, or a bigger dish and you spread it out a bit thinner. You get the thing cooking. You deal with the incident because you know that you've got to put food on the table. And then you go into problem management, and one by one you pin your children to the wall and say, what the hell have you done with my dish? We're doing incident and problem management, and we've done it all our lives. It doesn't matter what words we use. That's Apollo 13. And we all know now that Jim Lovell got it wrong. He should have said, Houston, we have an incident. And I always promised myself that if I met Jim Lovell, I would tell him he was wrong. And I did have dinner with Jim Lovell once at a conference in Norway, and I bottled out. But he did swear at me at the end of the night. We got on fine. Does that work for every practice? I think it does. But that's not important. Why does it matter? It matters because if we realise that we know this stuff, we have the chance to do it better. We have the chance to realise, I've got experience in this. I'm not new to incident management because I've been cooking. So actually, I understand incident management. I know about driving a car or fixing a car and what to do about it. And if we believe we know that, the chances are we'll be better at what we're doing. So it makes us confident, and it makes learning something less intimidating, because actually this is easy to do it. And of course, it makes explaining it a bit more easier. And I'll demonstrate that in a minute with differential calculus, which you probably all understand. You do all understand differential calculus, that's the point. It's only when they dress it up in a maths lesson that it gets intimidating. It gives us that foundation. So, one of my heroes is a guy called Professor Ian Stewart. He's got some brilliant stuff. He's done a lot of popularisation of science and interpretation of science. He was a co-author and the lead author, really, I believe, of the Discworld science books that he wrote with Terry Pratchett and Jack Cohen. And one of his concepts is a thing he calls lies to children. And it's about how we learn. It's about learn. We tell our children outrageous lies. Tooth Fairy, Father Christmas, yeah. Talking rabbits, cows that drive cars, all sorts of crazy stuff. And yet somehow we grow up reasonably sane. Stewart demonstrates that that's how we learn. And he got a lovely example about the solar system. So you're talking to someone that's never thought about the solar system before. The sun's a little bright yellow thing that goes across the sky, occasionally. And that's it. So no, it's a massive burning ball of gas. And we live on a ball-shaped rock going round in an enormous circle. And you think, wow, that's weird. Okay, right. Yeah, it's big, so big it looks like. Yeah, okay, got it. Now I understand the solar system. And you say, good, because that's not true. It's not actually a ball-shaped rock. It's flattened a bit at the top and the bottom because it spins, gives you day and night. Oh, yeah. And going in a circle. Yeah, well, it's not actually a circle either. It goes in an ellipse, sometimes a bit nearer, sometimes a bit further away. And then they go, oh, right, ellipse. Yeah, okay, great. Now I understand the solar system. You say, well, actually, that's not true either. Because it isn't a proper ellipse, because perihelion precesses due to Einsteinian relativistic effects. Well, we all knew that, obviously. The point Stuart's making is if you sit somebody down and tell them everything we know about the solar system and Kepler's laws and all that complicated stuff, they just glaze over. They learn by believing the simplifications first. And if you want to teach anybody change management, start with the simplifications first. If you throw the whole complications at them, they won't work. It's how we learn, not just as children, but as adults too. And it's a phrase that I've been using about learn it simple first. And before you get into complications. And that's pretty obvious. You'll know that that's how you learn things. The message is if you're teaching somebody something, don't get too excited about how wonderful and powerful it is. When my kids were little, I tried to teach them maths or help them with their maths homework. I was no good at helping them with their maths homework. I got a degree in physics and maths. I was no good at all at helping my kids maths. My then wife, who's an artist and is lost without a calculator, was the one to teach them that level of maths and arithmetic and learning. She was way better at it than I am because she understood why it was difficult and why it was tricky to. And that idea of learning simple is powerful. And the example I use a lot is, you all know about risk management? Everybody understands about risk management. If you want to teach risk management, talk about going to work in the morning. You look out the window and you say, is it going to rain? Because if it's going to rain, I don't want to get wet and I'm going to take an umbrella. If it isn't going to rain, I don't want to carry an umbrella around all day. If you can get out of the house with or without an umbrella, you have mastered risk management. Everything else is just complication. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it works. At the end of the year, if you never got wet, you probably got it wrong. You'll think, oh, I got wet once and I lost one umbrella. That's okay. It's understandable, acceptable risk. And then you get more complicated other factors. You think, well, blue sky and there's no forecast for rain, but I've just spent £110 on this fancy hairdo. And if there's the slightest chance of getting rained on, I am not taking it. I'm carrying the umbrella with me today. Or you might think, after work, I'm going straight to play football. And I'm going to get hot and sweaty and shower. So I don't care if I get wet walking to the football ground. So we know about these extenuating factors and other things. That's what risk management is about. We do it. And if you own an umbrella, you do risk management. So, one of the things that I had trouble with when I was doing ITIL 4 Foundation, Train the Trainer session, was the guy who was teaching us was very, very clever. Actually. Very, very clever man. But he was trying to tell us how powerful and wonderful this was. And I didn't get it. I only got it later when the light bulb went on and I realised I already knew it. So we're back to these guys having dinner. So again, now this is a picture of people being fed. So what you're trying to achieve with your value chain is you're going to move from hungry family to fed family. So it's obvious what we do. We go through some steps. We understand who needs to be fed, when they need to be fed. We've got some caveats about what they will and won't eat. And we then come up with a menu and then a shopping list. We go off to the store and buy it with or without standard changes. And then you come back and you cook it and you put the food on the table and you get people in to eat and you do the feedback bit. Did you like that? Shall we have that again? Did it need more chili or whatever? And then you do the review or washing up stage of it, and we've done it through. And the interesting thing is that that's a value stream, and you confuse value stream and value chain at that point, because that's how we go from one to the other. But in fact, there's another way of going from hungry family to fed family. I can't be bothered cooking tonight, we're going to McDonald's. Delivers against the chain separate streams. There are different ways of delivering the idea. And when you realise that you do that at home, what are we going to do for dinner tonight? Shall we go out? Shall we stay in? Shall I cook? Are we going to do something complicated or a ready meal? We're doing exactly what we're talking about in the ITIL value chain, value stream kind of concept. We understand a single objective. We've got ways of doing it. And when you get that, then the complicated stuff at work is easy to come by. So now we're on to differential calculus. You all mastered differential calculus at school? It was the first thing in maths I ever had trouble with, because the teacher was, tending to zero, and this bit gets, to teach my kids in. Right. What's 30 miles an hour mean? Does it mean that you have to travel for a whole hour and know that you've travelled 30 miles? And I said, no, nonsense. It's going fast. I understand that going fast or going slowly. Speed is just a differential of location against time. And we understand it perfectly well. And if you think about that, you realise you understand calculus, because it's how fast something changes. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to do 30 miles for an hour to know you're doing 30 miles an hour. And you can even get into second level differential calculus. What's the 0 to 60 time of your car? That's the second differential of location as against time. Simple. We understand speed and acceleration, and then we go to school and don't understand differential calculus. And we don't teach it properly. And we also understand that a simple approach is good enough. Again, lapsing into physics. Anyone know Newton's second law? Force equals mass times acceleration? It's not true. That's not what Newton said. Force is actually the differential of momentum with respect to time. So it's mass times acceleration plus speed times how fast the mass is changing. Most of the time, the mass doesn't change. On the other hand, if you're trying to plot where a Saturn V rocket will go, which is burning fuel at about 20 tons a minute, that change matters. But for most of us, we don't need it. So again, that complication or lack of complication we can bring to the work environment. Use the simple approach. Count the heads, not the feet. Do all that work and come up with zero. And it applies to the two big ideas I want to talk about quickly, collaboration and empowerment. They aren't new ideas. Yeah. If you think about Stonehenge, that's proof that IT did not invent capacity management, even if it thinks it did. Yeah, there aren't bits left over, there weren't gaps in it. And there's some great research about Stonehenge that shows that they had mastered project management to a degree that is rare today. It's worth reading. The degree of project management and temporary accommodation and food and all sorts of stuff that they set up to build that is amazing. And the army have mastered empowerment many years ago. That's from Saving Private Ryan. Yeah, they get one guy, 8 guys, 1 in charge, and they send them off. You know, he's not reporting back for orders every 2 minutes. He's told to go and do something and then get on with working out how you do it. So these are old skills. The more I've worked in IT, the more I've reminded of the old joke that all teenagers believe they've just invented sex. And they couldn't possibly talk to their parents about sex because their parents don't know about it, which when you think about it is the most illogical concept you can have. But remember when you were a teenager, you knew that this amazing thing was something your parents didn't know about. IT's like that. Oh, capacity management, that's the night. No, it's not. None of these things are ITs. So collaboration. 2 heads are better than 1. And it occurred to me that the power of collaboration is working with people who are not like you. Now that's my dog, well, our dog. I'm walking around top of the mountains around where we live in Portugal. And we moved there in 2020 and it's a lockdown, so there's nobody else about. And we're walking around up there. And we're following paths, and I don't know where I'm going, I'm exploring, experimenting, and a lot of the time the path would sort of stop around some bushes, and there may be 4 ways it could go. And I began with sort of pushing through the bushes, trying to see where the path was on the other side, and realised I was being stupid. I was accompanied by a colleague who had different and more appropriate skills. So the next time it happened, I took a step back and said, "On you go, Chloe." And the dog would go forward, and she picked the right path every time. Because I was looking for a path, she's following the scent of the wild boar that used the path at night. I hope it's only at night. And every time she goes the right way first, and that's what we do now. Don't know the way? You follow the track, Chloe, and she will always take me the right way. And that's the big message I was trying to take back to work. Yet don't look for people who are like you to collaborate with. Look for people who are not like you to collaborate with. It's harder, but the benefits are massively better. And the bottom is that's my eldest granddaughter. She's 5 now, but those 2, between them, you know, I throw the food on the floor, the dog eats it. As a teamwork, they got rid of everything. Genuine collaboration. And the other big thing we talk about is empowerment. And again, you grew up with empowerment, something that I call constraint space. And I'll demonstrate that you know about constraint space. You all would have been in some situation like this when you were little. Parent says, okay, you can go and play outside. You can play in our garden or next door's garden and the field behind the house. And you can play with Johnny and Susan next door, but you mustn't play with Quentin because we don't like his mother. And you're not to cross the road, and you're going to be back for lunch at 12:30. If you're anything like my mother, that would be immediately followed by, right, what have I just told you? And you say, I can play in our field in an hour, and go to bed, I play Johnny here, not with Quentin, I must cross the road, back here at 12:30. No, be back for lunch at 12:30 with your hands washed, and you'll be better back at 20 past. You've got to watch, yes, right, off you go, have a nice time. And you knew you didn't have to come in and say, can we play ball, can we play football, can we play running about, can we play hide and seek? Because you were empowered to do whatever you wanted within that declared constraint space. And that constraint space changed and evolved as you got older. So by the time I was 17, 18, the constraint space was, if you're going to be back late, take the key. Yeah, because I'm not staying up late to let you in. And the other big thing in my parents was, if you're going drinking, you have to eat first. And for my daughter, that's my daughter with the other grandchild there. So the sandpit's the constraint space. But I remember saying to her, if you want me to come and get you later, you want to lift back afterwards, that's fine, but you have to tell me before 8 o'clock. And I won't have any wine with dinner. But if you don't tell me till 9 o'clock, the odds are I'm not going to be able to come to get you. And those kind of rules we got. And you think about those at work. That's what you want your governance to do. We talk about governance as a complicated thing. Set the constraint space, maintain it, check people are within it and not breaking the rules. That's really what we're talking about. We do it all the time. And the last slide of any meaning, it's all about value. Everything's about value. And value is a word like beauty and attractiveness. That is meaningless without the caveat of who it's for. We know the phrase beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or value is also in the eye of the beholder. And it's important to understand that things give different value to people. We've all driven around posh areas and seen amazing houses with cars like that parked outside. I mean, you might even be one of them. Why do rich people not put their fancy cars inside their big garages to keep them safe? It's because they want you to know they've got one. Major part of the value of that kind of car. So we were driving friends to dinner once, people we got the dog from actually, and they're sat in the back of our then brand new Skoda Yeti. It's my IBM redundancy money. We've still got it, even in Portugal. So we're driving along, and Julie in the back says, "It's really comfortable, this car, isn't it? I'm impressed. It's nice and smooth and lovely and comfy, yeah." And her husband, Charlie, who's an army officer in HR, he says, "Yeah," he said, "they're really good. We need to replace the RAV. This would be ideal. They gave me one of these for a few weeks while I was working away from home. So yeah, maybe we should get one of these next." And she went, "No way, Charlie, don't be so ridiculous." And he said, "But you just said it's a nice, comfortable car." She said, "I'm not having the neighbours see a Skoda parked on my drive." The perfect car? No way, because a key part of the value of a car to that woman is what the neighbours will think. That he bought a Volvo, which is apparently acceptable to the kind of neighbours they've got. So don't think you know what value is. You actually have to get inside the people. You may not like what you find, but you know it from real life. What is it you actually want from this? And you may think, oh God. If you've got teenagers, or you remember being one, remember, I guarantee that when you get teenage children, you'll find yourself saying things that you swore you would never say. Is that supposed to be music? And you do the same at work. You know, is that what you're going to use it for? Well, you're paying, so yeah, that's value. And if we get that, maybe the whole of our job becomes a little easier. We get a bit less precious about it. And that's the whole driving force to me behind customer experience. It's not about delivering to the customers an experience we would like to have. It's delivering to the customers the experience they would like to have. And still in IT and lots of other places, I see too much of people deciding they know what I want. And yeah, I'll give you, you'll love this. I hate this. And yeah, you get the same thing in restaurants. If you've ever had the classic argument with a waiter about that, honestly, I like my steak well done. I'm sorry you don't. I'm sorry you feel offended for it, but can I remind you that I'm paying and you're serving? I have left restaurants, certainly never gone back to them for those reasons. Exactly that. So that's all I wanted to talk about. Interesting to find out whether you agree or disagree, now or later. I did put my communications like that. That is a Portuguese phone number, so but we're on the same time zone, so it's fine. And I put Twitter up there, but nobody's staying on Twitter anymore, are they? So it's a good example of dynamism and how improvements are targeted at an imagined future state. And when I put these slides together, the imagined future state was not nobody wants to be on Twitter anymore. So it's actually turned out to be quite a good example of what I was talking about.
Is Twitter even going to work next week? Is Twitter even going to work next week?
Is it going to work tomorrow? Is it working now? When did you last try it?
I haven't.
A few hours ago. It's fine.
Okay.
But there's some funny things happening on it. If you follow people like Rosie Holt and the Laura Kusenberg translator, they're all suddenly putting parity in their names.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a good example of that. Yeah, imagined future state, and then it comes and bites you from behind. But we've had the pandemic. We know about that. With a major lesson to. Oh, how about that? I just got a Twitter notification.
We've just been kicked off of Twitter for defaming it, I think. So I wanted to just put on here, I noticed that we have Interestingly, we have more chats on that screen over there than we have on the screen over here, which is kind of bizarre. So let's bring them up, and then Ivor, you're very welcome to come and read them down on the screen.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So let me just maximise that.
About Mondays.
That's talking about Mondays, right? But this one just came in
Okay.
now. So with ITIL 4 taking on board other frameworks, do you feel like ITIL is in danger of complete dissolution like a watered down bouillon, or the addition of other frameworks enhances ITIL like ice cubes in a good drink?
Depends what kind of drink it is, whether you should put ice in it. I had this argument in bars as well with whiskey. I think, to me, talk about, I think I agree with it, but I would phrase it in a different way about dissolution. ITIL version 3 was arrogant. It was written in an exceedingly arrogant fashion. And I was one of the people that wrote it, so I'm allowed to say that. I saw that arrogance in a good way. I saw that happen in hotel rooms around the world, with in Sharon's hotel room, with lots of red wine and lots of cigarette smoke. And it was built to be all-embracing, overarching, bringing things together. That's what we thought we needed in version 3. It came up with the service life cycle and all the rest of it. Maybe it worked, maybe it was the right thing at the time, but ITIL 4 did the opposite. It set out to be federal, to say, there's something over there that does that, and we need to live with those DevOps chaps. And it's got to fit in with IT for IT and the other thing.
COVID?
No, the project management.
Prince 2?
No, not that kind of. Anyway, I'll come back to me in a minute. You've got to fit in with all those things. And some of the serious changes in ITIL 4 are to make it consistent with DevOps attitudes and other things. And I think that was the right thing at the right time. And I still think ITIL v3 was the right thing at the right time. So I wouldn't call it about dissolution, and I wouldn't even call it as a correction to a mistake. I think ITIL 4 is a child of its time. And it's the right thing to do. So it's ice cubes in that respect. And it's at a time when, ice cubes in a hot summer day with the right kind of drink for ice cubes. So I think it's correct. And it wouldn't necessarily have been the right thing to do back in 2006-7. So I think I like to think it's targeted. But I'm not an expert on ITIL 4. I got to foundation level and then discovered I was too old to go any further on that. And there's a limit to how much tricks you can teach an old dog. And I'm getting some worrying feedback from people who have gone deeper into ITIL 4 and level up about whether it quite knows where it's going. So we wait and see. But again, future imagined state. When you write a framework, you're trying to write it for the world that will be there when you've finished it and published it. And I think ITIL 4 did that right, and I think it is ice cubes in a drink time. But whether the world has changed so much that ITIL's now not doing it right, I don't know. And it also affects what other frameworks do. If TOGAF, that's what I was trying to think of. Because TOGAF is the everything's enterprise, and everything has to fit in to us. Now, if that's successful and that, or someone else wins that, we're the dominant factor and everything has to work with us, then the federal approach has probably had the rug taken out from under it. If that doesn't happen, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen, then it's the right approach. But it's a future state. We make the best guesses we can and we go with it.
Excellent. Does anyone on the caller in here have an extra perspective on that? Tumbleweed. Are people online still able to speak?
Is there anybody?
I'm still here.
Yes, I'm here.
That sounded like a yes. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, no news is good news.
Okay, do we have any more questions for Ivor?
Is there 4 on there? 4 questions.
Yeah, there's the other 3 about whether you should meet on a Monday.
Ah,
My advice, don't do anything on Fridays,
no,
ever, under any circumstances.
unless it's going to the pub.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, we discovered, I was events manager for ITSM way back, ITIMF back in the beginning. So I was arranging one-day events. We discovered that evening events worked in London because people come in. Daytime events didn't work so well. Half-day events are not so good. And there's all sorts of issues. But Fridays, absolutely never on. And we had this weird concept about London is most of the people who work together in central London don't live anywhere near each other. Other parts of the country have got a very different approach. So their geography comes into it big time as well. And we tried to run a Scottish event, and nobody in Glasgow would go to Edinburgh. Nobody in Edinburgh would go to Glasgow. They were both willing to come to London. So I was running the Scottish region there, called Working for Access. So we decided we would have the next event in Stirling, which was easy for both Edinburgh and Glasgow. No bugger came at all.
Yeah.
I once was invited to speak at ITSMF Scotland, because I put my name on the list of potential speakers, and somehow they randomly selected me, and I went up to Edinburgh, and the organiser was talking to me at the end of it, and he said, "Richard, I'm sorry, we have to stop now. I have to go and get the best thing in Edinburgh."
Which was the train to Glasgow.
16:15 to Glasgow, yes. And that was it. His entire career was based around making sure that you never, ever stay for a drink in Edinburgh, because you've got to get back to Glasgow.
I was at university in Glasgow, so I'm definitely in Glasgow.
Okay. I'm currently based in Edinburgh, so but I'm quite happy to go across to Glasgow when they.
Well, I'm happy to drink anywhere.
So.
Yeah, me too. I just wanted to make a comment. It's interesting because I have worked with people around their CVs and like simplification and like you said, how you've extrapolated normal, natural behaviours that we have into IT and service management. And so interestingly enough, people just don't see. So I really love this presentation tonight. Like it is so, we do have so much that's translatable in our life, whether it be just normal skills, and we don't know how to apply it to work or writing it or applying for a job or whatever it might be, until somebody can help simplify it, like you said, into a language that works.
I mean, one of the phrases, it comes up in the fabulous and wonderful Spotify culture videos, but it certainly works for me. And I'm teaching DevOps foundation courses a lot these days, and the big message is the things I find myself talking about, examples, and the way you get the best out of empowered teams, I learned at university, not properly, and they're skills that I learned running student television at university, not in the 30 or 40 years of proper work since. But we had 3 hours on a Thursday night to make a programme. We had 7 till 10, and if you didn't get something in the can, literally, by 10 p.m, then you didn't have a show Friday. So we learned that you have to get something done, not perfection. Worse, the bars closed at 10 o'clock, so if you took all the way up to 10 o'clock, you didn't even get a drink. But I had 25 people in a studio with 3 cameras and front cameras behind the rest of it, and you're directing it. You've got to get those people to do what you need them to do, but they have to enjoy it because they're there for the fun of it. You've got no threats. You can't fire anybody. You have to make them want to be there and do it. And I learned more doing that than ever since. And I was talking to my middle daughter, who she was for a while working for Norfolk Wildlife Trust, working a lot with volunteers. She's got more money being a freelance tree searcher nowadays, which is what she does. Anyone needs their tree searching like you do. And she was working with volunteers in Norfolk Wildlife Trust, and we were comparing notes, exactly the same messages. And she had 2 groups of people. She had young, sort of unemployed people who can't get a job yet, or starting on, who want to do something. And she had people who relatively recently retired and want to keep active. And she said the real challenge is that you 2 very different groups of people to motivate, trying to get them to work together. And that collaboration thing comes in as well. You get the 2 groups to work as a mixed team, you get better results than letting the young kids do something that the old people do. So it's definitely, if you know about volunteers, so take an analogy, if you want to find a good DevOps manager, find somebody that does scouts or cubs or guides or woodcraft folk or something. Because probably if they can make that happen, they'll probably be quite good at getting the idea of empowered teams happening as well. And it's just getting those skills that we've got, bringing them in. And we don't recognise it, and our HR departments don't recognise it. You know, HR departments, what the guy said, it's like banks. They are only interested in people who don't need them. And so, you know, if you want to come and be a manager in this area, you've got to have done it before. And how the hell do I get started? And again, that daughter, the wildlife wrestler, it took her 5 or 6 years to get a break into it because all the jobs she wanted to do required you to have experience of doing that job before. And she eventually got a 1 year, very low paid secondment somewhere in Dorset. And she ended up with enough on her CV to get the job again. But you know, those skills, look at those skills. Ask your HR department, open their eyes and look at them as people. It's changing a bit, I think, but slowly.
We have another question that's come in through the
Ooh.
online chat. It says, you mentioned briefly having to unteach people. Is there anything you had to unlearn during your career to succeed in ITSM?
I had lots of things. Unlearn is the phrase, not my phrase. I've taken it from concepts. We teach it on the DevOps leader course, and other people preach about it. There's lots of things we all have to unlearn in IT. What Windows are you on? I'm a Mac person, so this is what, Windows 10, 12?
Well, it was on this machine. I don't know. Windows 11 is the latest.
In the world at the moment.
Windows
So,
11.
in order, yeah, as you work through Windows, you learn the new features. There are always some things that you have to unlearn. It used to do that, and you don't do that anymore. So we do have to unlearn things. I'm trying to think of some specific unlearning thing in service management. You can see how things have changed. The service desk, a very silly example of a service desk. When we started teaching service desks, we were advising people to have an answer phone. And now when we're teaching service desks, we say under no circumstances must you have an answer phone. You know, you mustn't let messages go through to recording because then if it's urgent, people can do nothing to make it happen. If it's really urgent, they'll stay on and they'll let it ring. So that kind of unlearning attitude of realising what's important. Unlearning that IT is an end in itself. So there's lots of little things in it, but the things you need to unlearn are often the very specific things about the environment you're in when you're changing them. I'm old enough to see all sorts of things unlearn. I was just I'll tell you one silly thing in life, and it happens in work as well. When I'm meeting my daughters, we're doing things. I was staying with them, and I was saying, "Well, what are we doing tomorrow? What time should we meet up? Where should we meet?" And they look at me, well, justifiably, as if I crawled out the ark. And they'll say, well, I'll text you in the morning. But I come from a generation where if you didn't plan the day before what you were doing, then, you know, you completely missed. And I can't get myself out of the habit of doing that. And meetings at work is the same environment. Well, when shall we meet again? Shall we plan now? No, well, when it gets critical, we'll just put an email round and we'll bring it together. And getting out of that, or first of all, recognising that you're stuck in that automatic trend of thinking, of still thinking that way. And it's very, very hard to stop that kind of thinking. And there'll be something else down the line.
On your last example there, might it be worth even to plan for a meeting, let's say in 2 weeks, even if you don't see any problems coming?
Yeah.
Because you're at least keeping a conversation channel open, as opposed to waiting, oh, well, whenever.
And we can use the modern communication technique to say, well, we'll plan it for 2 weeks, because it's easy to cancel it. And it used to be a lot harder to cancel it. And my experience of companies these days is if you think you might want a meeting in 2 weeks, you need to book a meeting room now, and then you can always give it up again. So yeah, there are absolute buckets. And that again is one of the things that I had to learn the other way around in IBM. If you think you want a meeting in 2 months' time, book the room now.
Well, but not just for booking logistics purposes,
Yeah.
but something else is likely to come up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I agree. And there's no answer to any of these things. The big answer to everything is, one of the things I would teach people when I talk about ITIL, is the first thing is understand best practice. It's not about things you should do. It's about the vanilla approach that works for most people. Your job is to be an expert on your situation. And therefore, your job is to know your situation and know when the basic rules don't apply to you, and to trust yourself. Something I learned in prison, working for the prison service, I should put that. If you've ever been in a prison or worked in a prison, they're great places. It makes you realise the presumptions you bring with you. Yeah, this is a universal rule. I guarantee a lot of those aren't in prison. There'll be a green sign outside there that says fire exit. And anywhere you go in Europe, or it'll say, Nudu Gang or Sortie de Secours or whatever, you'll see the same green sign with a stylized person running. You follow that, you know you will come to a door you can open. In a prison, the fire exits are locked. And the reason they're locked is because if you don't lock them, the buggers won't wait for the fire alarm to go off before they open the door and let it. I remember a conversation in Hull Prison. Lovely guy, John Marriott, he's dead now. He took the blame for Isle of Wight escape. But there was a fire. We were in his office, and there's a fire engine at the gate. And the officers aren't letting them in until they justify why it is. He's talking to an inmate later. He said, "What's the fire alarm stuff about?" He said, "Oh, it's just a little fire in a cell. No big deal." And the guy says, "Well, what would have happened if it was a major fire? And all the exits are locked? What would have happened to us?" And John said, "Well, you'd burn to death." And he said, "Well, that's hardly right, is it?" Said, "Shouldn't have done the crime, mate." And he went, "Yeah, I see your point." So a lot of the unlearning stuff and those issues and the meeting rooms and whether we should arrange a meeting or shouldn't or what it is, depends on your local knowledge. And the big message is trust yourself. If it feels right for you to do it, it's almost certainly right for you to do it. Don't matter what some idiot miles away thought when they were writing a book. I speak in as one of the idiots. I knew I was writing stuff in change management, configuration management and testing that was wrong in some situations. But it didn't stop us putting it down, but we tried to put it in place. This is good generic stuff. If it works for you, great. If it makes you realise it won't work for you, even better, because you'll then work out what does work for you. And there's a trick for those things. So yeah, absolutely.
Do we have another comment that's come through? A common thing to unlearn for developers who go into DevOps is that they tend to view all incidents as problems. What's worth that they often get rewarded for such firefighter behaviour, and then you find that they are always surrounded by fires.
Yeah, don't get me started on firefighters. There's a phrase you'll hear a lot about the power of DevOps is when the person that wrote the code is the one that gets dragged out of bed at 3 a.m. to fix it, then things will get better. I worked in a home office, and there was a guy, ICL programmer, who was coming out regularly to fix code that was crashing at 2 o'clock in the morning. It turns out that he'd deliberately written code in there to make it crash at 2 in the morning, because every time he got called out, he got a minimum 3 hours double time call out.
Money.
So again, be careful of the way you read these things. Yeah. But yeah, they do. Developers don't understand the word incident, and they don't understand that a workaround can turn into an easier way of working than actually fixing something. So that is a big message, yeah. We've all worked in situations where you come up with a temporary solution and everyone goes, hell, that works. Yeah. Don't bother fixing it. We're okay, we'll leave it like that. And yeah, but developers don't do that. I'm married to somebody with OCD. I hate to think what she would have been like 40 years ago before the therapy and the pills, but she's still pretty obsessive. And she started off as a programmer before she got into sales and marketing. And if she'll find something wrong or something's missing, she will not stop till she's found it. And phrases like, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, we'll find it tomorrow. No, we'll find it now. I'm doing it. She tells a story in a previous marriage that they had a dinner party and she was putting things away and there was a spoon missing. which was 11 o'clock at night, and she found it at 4 a.m. Her husband apparently was not pleased and didn't speak to her for a week. But there's no way she can stop it. Classic developer behaviour. You know, there's something here that's wrong. Well, don't worry, we've come up with an alternative approach now. You don't never need to understand what happened. No, can't let it go. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that one.
Okay. So nothing new has come through on the chat.
Good.
Anything else? Any more questions from anyone else? Right. Well, in that case, Ivor, I think it leaves for me to thank you very much for teaching us a bunch of things that we already knew.
Yeah.
So I feel like I have both been educated and not learned anything at exactly the same time.
That was exactly the intention.
We have a note from Kylie, as you can see just there. Thanks for a great presentation. Yeah. So
If anybody wants the slides, they're welcome to them or anything like that.
yeah, we'll have them
Fantastic, yeah.
published on our site in due course. We have Brilliant from Al. Thanks for the talk and hybrid event, much appreciated. From Guilherme, I hope I've got your name right.
Well, thanks to those people who joined us online.
Thank you very much to everyone for joining us, whether it's online or in person.
Yeah.
Thanks for sitting through the AGM, which is always a fun experience.
It's always fun. It's always fun to follow an AGM because you know that you're not going to be outdone by an AGM. It's got to be an easy act to follow.
And thank you very much for making our annual lecture the great event, which means that actually somebody turns up to the AGM, because if we just tabled the AGM, we wouldn't get anybody at all. We have another very entertaining Ivor, thank you, and an awesome thanks so much for a great presentation.
Before we thank Ivor, can we just ask people online if they'd like to join the committee?
We can indeed reiterate the point that if anyone would like to join the committee, we certainly would be very, very grateful. So I'm getting distracted by the fact that people keep saying how amazing the presentation was.
It's a bot. I set it up before it started.
So you did, yes, yes. So yes, one of the points that you made there was about volunteer organisations and what you learn inside a volunteer organisation. Well, welcome to the committee and your learning. As per Ivor MacFarlane's expert recommendation starts here. So certainly that's what I found since joining the committee. You learn an awful lot by dealing with people, as you say, on a volunteer basis. It makes quite a difference and it gives a lot of transferable skills that you can take into your professional life as well. So, on that little marketing note, was there anything else we need to add? No. Alan, Marilyn, is there anything that we should add before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I think it's good.
I haven't forgotten anything this time. Wow, that's got to be a first.
Were there any matters that we needed to raise? I know that was one of the items on the AGM. Nothing. Our next event will be, we're looking for January. We should get some advertising out for that soon. We haven't confirmed our speaker though.
Yeah.
So, and I think we're looking to have it as a face-to-face.
Yes, we're trying to do as many as we can, both in person and hybrid, remote. And sometimes we might even have a remote speaker, allowing us to get people without dragging them all the way from Portugal.
Well, I was hoping to come anyway.
Good. We're so glad
Thank you very much. Yes.
Excellent. Right. Well, in that case, for those of us who have bothered to come all the way in, we're a bit like there should be some catering outside, if I remember correctly, and we'll wrap up the recording.
So, well done, Anka.